The surface of our planet is populated by growing organisms. Curious, intricately organized chemical systems that take in matter from their surroundings and use these raw materials to generate copies of themselves. These organisms are extraordinarily diverse, yet our ancestors saw that all these things had something in common. They called that something life. But since then, we have struggled to define it. Life has very interesting and almost magical characteristics. It can respond and adapt to its environment, it can process energy to grow and develop, and it can also reproduce many copies of itself. If you think about it, we are the most amazing thing in the universe. Have you ever wondered how our body functions, what we are made of, or where do we come from? You're not alone. These questions are the great secrets of the universe, and many scientists have invested many years of their life to answer them. Let's zoom into my body to see what we are made of and begin to understand what is life. From this scale we can see the hairs on my face as big as grass. The skin looks like a dry and lifeless thing. Let's cut the skin and see what's inside it. We see that it is made of different layers or tissues, each with a specific function. Let's zoom to one of the tissues called the epidermis and see what it's made of. As impossible as it may seem, the skin is made up of microscopic organisms. We call these tiny organisms cells. From this perspective, at the cellular level, it seems that they are the ones that are alive, and we are just the home that they built. All animals, plants, and fungi are made of cells. We call them multicellular organisms. But there are also unicellular organisms, such as bacteria, archaea, and protists, only we cannot see them because they are very small. A bacterium, a tree, or a fungus may look completely different from a human being, but our cells are mostly the same. And if you didn't have an existential crisis knowing that we are a walking colony of cells, prepare to know what's inside them. Inside the cell we find an aqueous solution called cytoplasm. Its composition is 60% water and 40% biomolecules, making the cytoplasm a gel-like substance. From this perspective at the molecular level, the cell stops looking like a living organism as we know it and looks more like a strange machine with impressive nanotechnology. Billions of biomolecules working together in a chaotic way, dictating the behavior of the cell and maintaining it alive. Most of the biomolecules in the cell are proteins. They give the cell its abilities and appearance. Proteins are like the gears in a clock, like the microchips in a computer. For this reason, proteins are the most abundant biomolecule in the cell. There are approximately 2.5 billion proteins in a human cell. There are more proteins in a cell than stars in our galaxy. Let's zoom in on a protein to see if there is something special about them. They are composed of the most abundant atoms on Earth: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur, nothing special. But what makes them unique is their molecular structure. They are easily the most complex molecules in the universe. Despite being extremely complex and appearing to be a random collection of atoms, proteins are a string composed of amino acid links that folds back on itself to take its three-dimensional shape. If we highlight the molecule with arrows and ribbons, we can better observe its structure and how it is folded. If you think about it, they are literally nanomachines, but what makes proteins so special is that they carry out chemical reactions so improbable that they are almost impossible in the universe to occur. Plant cells, for example, have a protein complex called photosystem II. It uses photons' energy to split water and obtain the precious electrons and protons the cell needs to power up itself. It then binds the two unpaired oxygen atoms into one oxygen molecule as a waste product. They also accelerate chemical reactions to incredible speeds. Carbonic anhydrase can catalyze 1 million reactions in 1 second, which is absurdly fast. Some proteins function as motors that carry cargo back and forth. Other proteins control the passage of molecules across the membrane, and others serve as sensors that detect molecules and external signals. Almost all jobs inside the cell are carried out by proteins, and the sum of all chemical interactions and chemical reactions carried out by proteins and other biomolecules is called metabolism. When proteins stop working properly or are blocked, the metabolism is altered, and this is what causes disease or death in the cell. There is another equally impressive biomolecule in the cell. The DNA. It stores all the cell information in linear form. It is composed of 4 different molecules that come together as links to form sequences that store the information of the entire cell. You may wonder what kind of mysterious information the cell contains, what kind of sequences can ultimately create something as complex as a cell. DNA stores the information to produce all the different proteins. Each segment of DNA that codes for a protein is called a gene, and the set of all genes in a cell is called a genome. All living organisms store their information in a genome and materializes its existence through proteins. To reproduce and make more copies of themselves, living organisms replicate their genome to inherit their traits. One amazing feature DNA possesses is that the nucleotides that make up its sequences can bond with another nucleotide pair. Adenine binds with thymine and cytosine with guanine. Therefore, the genome is always found as a double helix of 2 DNA strands, creating the famous pattern that we all know. To copy the information, the cell separates the 2 DNA strands and synthesizes a complementary DNA strand in each of the original ones, ending up with 2 copies of the genome. All cells contain a lipid membrane, which physically encapsulates the cell's water and biomolecules. Without it, the cell fades into oblivion and ceases to exist. It is a material with fluid characteristics, but very flexible and difficult to tear. It is made out of phospholipids, which aggregate by van der Waals forces to form the lipid barrier. It prevents the passage of polar molecules such as water. But it does not prevent the passage of neutral molecules such as oxygen or carbon dioxide. Even though all cells are very similar in their molecular composition, some cells contain a significantly more complex metabolism, are many times larger, and contain organelles within them. To differentiate these cells from those that do not contain organelles, we divide them into 2 groups. Bacteria and archaea cells do not possess organelles, and we categorize them in a group called prokaryotes. Animal, plant, fungi, and protist cells have organelles, and we categorize them in a group called eukaryotes. Organelles are compartments that the cell uses to carry out different reactions and chemical interactions more efficiently. But there is another type of organism on Earth that is not a cell, but like us is made of the same biomolecules. We call them viruses, and they tend to be smaller than cells. They also have genome and proteins, some even have a lipid membrane, but their strategy to reproduce is extremely parasitic. Viruses take advantage of cells and utilize their resources and energy to reproduce. For this reason, they don't need to process energy or have an active metabolism like a cell, they just need to keep their genome and structure in good condition until they find another cell to parasitize it and replicate. Now that we know that living organisms are made of atoms and are kept alive by chemical reactions, we can begin to study them in more depth from a chemical or biochemical point of view. If you want to know how the cell works in more detail, how we function as multicellular organisms, our origins and evolution, why we get sick or why we age, just subscribe and like the video to continue watching more content on molecular biology.